You describe your field of study or the work that you do in the area of psychoneurobiology. I'd love for you to maybe unpack a little bit about what that actually is and how what attracted you to psychoneurobiology work.
So that is, the psycho stands for mind, neuro for brain, biology for body. And those are three separate components that work together to create the networks that drive how we function as human beings. And we are able to control that network. And so the work that I do and have been doing for 38 years now is understanding how that network works and how we can influence and make the necessary changes in the networks that drive us. So if there's something that's driving us in the wrong direction and creating disruption in our life, leading to more extreme mental health challenges, to be able to recognize those signals and then to track that back to the source and in the mind, brain, and body, and then to reconstruct that. So psychoneurobiology looks at how to do that, and it specifically looking at how does information get into the mind, brain, body network, and how they're connected. So if my mind is messy and I'm having a messy experience, I'm not managing that. What does that look like in the brain? What does that look like in the body? And how does that play out into our life? And then how can we control that? So it's a form of it's basically falls under the realm of neuroscience, but it's much more specific, where it's not just neuroscience. Classical neuroscience looks at brain producing mind. This is looking at, no, the brain can't produce the mind because the brain's a physical organ. When you die, your brain dies. So your mind is separate from your brain, and it actually drives your brain and drives your body and therefore the outputs.
Absolutely. I love all that. And I think what I'm hearing from what you said is it's really the mind that is driving all of this. Like if you have a messy, unhealthy mind, it's going to lead to an unhealthy, messy body. Now, does it work in reverse though? You know, I'm a fitness guy. I got a background in health and fitness, competed in bodybuilding, did a lot of fitness coaching. I've always believed that, you know, you can't have a healthy mind without a healthy body. Would that fall into your understanding, or at least what you've uncovered in the research?
Well, yes. So in a way, yes, it's more of a feedback loop. So mind is first. So mind is good. After mind, you're dead. So your mind is your aliveness. So the decision to work on your body is a mind-driven decision. The decision to persist and keep working on your body in terms of exercise, healthy eating, all that kind of thing, that is mind-driven. And then so you make the decision, you do the exercise, you eat the healthy food, mind-driven. You can't use your body without your mind because you're dead. So if you look at it like that, your first step is to make the decision with your mind to look after your body and then to actually do what you need to do to look after your body. And that then feeds back into the mind. And that's a level of the mind brain body relationship. And then on top of that, we're also using our mind to deal with our thoughts and to deal with our reactions to life and understand what we've been exposed to and how that impacts us, which is also mind driven. So it's always mind first and then brain and body. And then there's feedback. So if we don't look after our brain and our body, and we don't manage our mind, or if we're managing our mind, but we're not looking after the brain and the body, then the mind's got to work through a damaged brain and body, which makes it so much more difficult. Also, if our brain and body are unhealthy, it's feeding back and increasing the messiness in the mind. So it works both ways. Once you're dead, none of that counts. But basically, while you're alive, we need to be recognizing with our mind that the impact of a brain and body that's not healthy, and recognize that, okay, this could be contributing to my mind issues, make a decision of my mind to address the brain and body health. And then if there's still stuff left over, which there always is, because that's just how we are as humans, then address that level of the mental health challenge or whatever it is that you're trying to achieve.
We spent a lot of time on this on the last episode, but I think that there, for me at least, there was a point where we looked at mind and brain almost as interchangeable, right? Are there still areas of science or still people that see it, because the way that you're explaining it, it's like the mind is completely separate. Like that's what drives our aliveness. Like when did we begin to understand that there was a separation of these two?
So this is ancient, thousands of years. For thousands of years, there was always the understanding from the ancient philosophers and the spiritual teachers and all those texts that the mind and the brain were separate. And it was only honestly, in around 50 years ago, and kind of, I actually think it's less. It's around, it's not, I think, from the science, it's a little bit more like 40 years ago, with the advent of understanding brain technology, that we started seeing, well, not we, I don't do that, but there was a branch of science started seeing specifically neuroscience, that now we can look inside the brain, therefore the brain is the organ of mental health, therefore the brain is producing thoughts, the brain is free will is an illusion, and a whole sort of body of science grew in the last 40 years. the advent of brain technology was around the mid 90s, and it's pretty much from the mid 90s till now that neuroscientific approach became very, very dominant. It's because it's easy to measure because you can see things, and but the measurements have been actually pretty inaccurate because you can't really look at a any kind of brain technology and say, well, that means that you're thinking this, or you're not reading your thoughts. We also can't look at how a person is showing up and saying, oh, well, it's because of some sort of mechanical damage in the brain. Sure, a mechanical damage in the brain from a traumatic brain injury or sports injury will definitely impact your emotions. And from that, and Parkinson's and Alzheimer's and those kinds of birth trauma, they definitely will impact, obviously, cognitive, emotional, etc., etc. But when we talk about people's mental health and we've eliminated those potential physical contributors, we're left with people in life and their life experiences. And because our life experiences are experienced by the mind, and the mind puts them into the brain as a form of energy, and the brain then is activated to respond. That is the correct way around. It's not the other way around. And the evidence for that is there's so much evidence for that. Because if you take like the standard neuroscientific experiment will be along the lines of let's getting people in a lab and getting them to do something and then looking at how their brain is responding. The interpretation of that is, oh, the brain made them do it. But they first had to do something and be alive and do something like answer some questions or look at some pictures. So they were doing something with their aliveness. And the brain measurement was the response that was being measured. So we've got to look at it. What came first? It's a chicken and egg situation. In this case, the mind comes first, and the brain is basically responding. It's not causing. And so that's where it's a pretty new thing. It's only the last 40 years that people have seen the mind and brain as the same thing.
Yeah, but it's what I'm hearing you talk about though. It's for me as a coach, somebody that works with a lot of guys that are trying to break through and transform in their lives. A lot of times people play victim to circumstances, victim to past events, victim to trauma. They're like, these things happen to me, so I have these conditions in my brain or in my body, and I can't change. And it's like, no, you always have the choice. You always have the decision. It sounds like, the mind is our ultimate source of responsibility.
I love how you said that. It is because our mind has got different levels, and we have the messy mind, which is the one that we do life with. It's the one that we consciously aware, the conscious connection and being aware. Then we have our wise mind, which is pretty much what we call our non-conscious mind in science, and that works 24/7, and it's driving how we function. But it also plays a massive protective role. It's where our wisdom resides, and wisdom is something that protects us. Wisdom is something that's always looking for what are the things that are tripping us up. And it scans all the memories that are clustered into thoughts, because memories are details that are clustered into, like memories are grouped together into these thought patterns or thought networks that look like trees. And your non-conscious mind's always scanning those 24/7, find what's disruptive, and then it sends signals, channels signals through the subconscious, which is like a little bridge or a doorway into the conscious mind. And the reason it sends those through is that, okay, it identifies, hey, this is disruptive, this way of thinking, or this thing that you've been exposed to, or this thing that you're thinking about too much, or whatever is getting strong, because whatever you're thinking about is growing in your brain and in your mind and in your body. And so the non-conscious mind scans what the messy mind is growing. And then it sends signals through to say, hey, pay attention, because this is disrupting your thought life, it's disrupting your relationships, it's whatever it is. And we as humans use our wise mind to stand back and observe our messy mind via our signals, and then we can change things. And that's really, I mean, it's actually that simple. It's hard to do, but to understand it is that simple. I mean, when you said like people get stuck, that is so true, because whatever you think about the most will grow, and it's growing in three places. So if you are constantly looking at a certain type of whatever, like social media, you're stuck on social media, or reading a certain type of whatever you're focusing on the most is growing. It's growing literally because that your mind reads it, your mind puts it into your brain as an energy wave. That energy waves creates all kinds of neurochemical and energetic and genetic responses in the brain. And then that means where a genetic response is then something's made. Genes result in creation of material, and that material is amino acids that form proteins. And those proteins hold the information in the form of vibrations. And so the more information that comes in, the more proteins are needed, and those proteins join together and grow into branch-like structures. And these are the thought networks that are made of this information, which is memories, all clustered together. And so whatever you're thinking about is then adding more and more and more, and it's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And then that if it's good, great, it's going to grow your brain health and your body health and your mind health and your sharpen optimization levels in your life. But if it's toxic, in any way, and there's different levels of toxicity on a scale of 1 to 10, that is going to um, inf- get bigger and disrupt your physiological functioning, which is the psychoneurobiology aspect. It's going to disrupt brain function. It's going to disrupt messy mind function. It's going to make the mind even more messy. So there's that feedback loop going. And some of the research I do shows that, and we can talk about that in a moment. But essentially, we can see when someone isn't managing their mind, we will see. I use QEEG, myself and my team, for our neuroscience research because it shows us millions of reactions in a second, and it's showing the energetic response of the brain, which is pretty much the precursor to driving the chemical responses in the brain and the neurochemicals and the hormones and the genetic responses and the changes. And then when those changes are created, it's also measuring what those changes are, this new structural function, the neuroplasticity. So we use that to see what's going on in the brain. And then we also look at the response in the body, because as soon as you have an experience like this conversation now, your mind is taking these energy waves, sound waves, light waves, and so on, gravitational fields, processing it into the brain. Your psychology part of your mind is thinking, feeling, and choosing around what you're hearing. All of this is put in the brain. All this energy stuff happens and proteins form and the trees grow. And that changes the brain. That then immediately sends an instruction down to the body. And in every cell of the body, we have these little, for want of a simple explanation, it's like a whole lot of beads that are sewn up together and then rolled into almost like a little blanket. So if you imagine lots and lots of beads being threaded together and rolled up, those are called microtubules, and every protein is holding information. And so in the brain, it's a tree like structure. In the cells, it's like a rolled up little sort of beaded blanket. And in the mind, it's a wave. Like if you're looking at a podcast, you see a wave. So every experience is going in triplicate, and each with a different level of impact. And the three work together, influencing how you show up. So if you're having a toxic experience, then it's this very jagged gravitational field in the mind. And that's moving through the entire body. It's not outside, it's out around and all of us. It's through the entire body. This is why our heart palpitates and we get this nervous reaction and we feel things in our bodies because it's going through the entire body. It then builds in the brain and immediately starts almost synonymously the experience builds into those little wired up blankets. And if it's toxic, the tree is not going to look like a beautiful, lush green tree. It's going to look like something toxic, like a broken, burnt tree, very much alive, sort of in the Lord of the Rings or something. Think of those trees that were so scary, something like that. And those rolled up blankets aren't rolled up, they start unrolling. And that then creates a vulnerability in the brain and a vulnerability in the body. And then we can pick up that kind of vulnerability through how the immune system responds. So then we pick up things like increased cortisol, increased ACTH, increased DHEA, changes in prolactin levels, changes in telomeres, which are the ends of chromosomes, which influence cell division. In other words, we'll see signs in our biology of that disruption. When those things start unwinding from that toxic tree's instructions, then that's when we start seeing vulnerability in our body, and then disease states start setting into our body over time. That's the whole psychoneurobiological process. And now that process we can recognize, with our wise mind, we can train ourselves to recognize all those signals. Then we can learn to do something about those signals, which is incredibly powerful.
So I've got lots of models, Frankie. That's okay. I'll use my little props. I've got some for the listeners. I'm holding up a brain and a skull. It's not real. So just in case someone thinks I'm holding up a real brain, I'm holding up a brain in a skull, a model of it. But basically, our brain is our physical, and it's 1% of who we are. So I'm holding up another model of a basically of a body, and our brain and our body collectively form about 1% of who we are. So think of the brain as this part of this 1%, and it's the physical. It's what we can see and touch, and it's, so that's kind of easy to understand. So brain is physical, but if you're dead, your brain does nothing. It disintegrates. So does your body. So what is the difference between you and I who are alive and the listeners and viewers and a dead person? Mind. So mind is your aliveness. It's this aliveness force. It's got obviously different parts to it, and it works in a very complex dynamic way, and I'll make it as simple as I can. But mind is the difference between the brain and, if someone being dead and alive. So the mind is actually about 99% of who we are. So it's huge. And if you want to kind of visualize it, I'll hold up this model. And here's your brain and body. Here's the 1%. And the mind is literally like this cloud of energy all around and moving through the body. And we can use physics to try and understand it. And we'll use things like quantum physics, gravitational fields, electromagnetics, work that Einstein's done. All of that is helping us understand this, literally this force that is moving through. Like even in our blood, there's an electrical force moving through our blood. There's an electrical force moving through our mind. Every part of our body, that is mind, because that's not there when you're dead. So when you're alive, it's this force. So mind is then very, very powerful. It's huge. It's 99% of who we are. It drives brain and body. So brain and body are responders. And the mind's always changing. So the brain is always changing. So the brain is neuroplastic. I did some of the first research on neuroplasticity in my field back in the 80s. And that means that the brain can change. So therefore mind changes the brain and the brain responds to the mind. So it's a responder. So that's kind of, so mind is all around, this like cloud all around, which we can explain with quantum physics and gravitational fields. And it's nothing weird. I mean, the fact that we can sit and not float is because of gravitational fields.
Yeah.
The fact that we can have use this technology to communicate is energy. It's the same kind of energy as what we're talking about around the brain and the body. So the mind is the aliveness, and we can look at it on a philosophical level as our aliveness, and scientifically in that way that I was describing, gravitational fields and so on. And on a psychological level, the mind is how you think and feel and choose. It's those three things. So you're always thinking. When you think, you feel, and when you think and feel, you choose. So think, feel, choose, always happening. And that's mind. And we think, feel, choose through the day and through the night. So your mind is always in action. You wake up with your mind, you go to bed with your mind, you eat with your mind, you exercise with your mind, you have conversations with your mind. You're using your mind now to listen to the podcast. Your mind is what drives your digestive system. So when you're eating, the way that your mind is, the messiness of your mind, with the managed how managed your mind is, influences the effectiveness of your digestion. I mean, your workouts, your mind determines the effectiveness of your workout. If you go and do a workout and you just say, oh, I'm just going to go get it over and done with, you'll lose up to 80% of the benefit of your mind. Of the exercise. I mean, that's huge. So yeah, you're working out, but you're so busy like, oh, I just got to get this over and done with, or you're worrying about something, you're actually losing up to 70 to 80% of the benefit of that workout, because your mind is driving your body, and your mind's a mess, so your body can't respond like it should. Same thing with food. I mean, that's how paramount this is. Our mind is driving everything. It's first base. Messy mind, messy life. Unmanaged messy mind, unmanaged messy life. Now, messiness is not a bad thing. To have a messy mind is not the end of the world. What is a problem is if you don't manage it. Messiness is inevitable in life, because life is one big experiment. We don't know what's coming up. We can't control people. We can't control events or circumstances. The only thing we actually have agency or control over is our mind, which is our thinking, feeling, and choosing, which leads to our responses. So we've got to train ourselves to be responders and not reactors in absolutely everything. And we kind of got to get away from the current narrative, which is, I'll do my workout, I'll do my meditation, I'll do my eat clean food, all of those you must do, and then I'll work on my mind. No, you can't do that. You can't say it's one of the 4 pillars. A lot of people talk about 4 pillars of healing and whatever. I always say, no, I'm sorry, but mind is driving all of that. It's mind and then everything else. Mind is the main thing, and everything grows out of mind. So everything you do, whether it's meditation, whether it's praying, whether it's and all of the above, it's driven by your mind. So mind is huge. And mind is not focused on sufficiently. It's become an area of neglect. It's malleable. It's trainable. It should be trained. Right from very young, we should be teaching our kids how to train their mind. And we should, with that concept in mind, we can dive in deeper, but that's sort of mind-brain connection. So my work has been around understanding what is mind, what is a thought, what are memories. They're not the same thing either. So mind is not the brain. Thoughts are not memories. What are emotions? How does it all work? What is the impact on mind, on brain? If your mind is working around and through our brain and body, what is it doing to the brain and the body? And I gave a couple of examples with the exercise and food, but obviously it goes deeper with things like trauma and what we say and do, etc.
And I love that you said prayer and meditation is a component of the mind. So would you say that, coming at it from maybe a spiritual side of things, like, is the mind, is your work, is this a scientific study of perhaps the soul or the spirit, or are they still kind of like separate as well. Because I mean, when I hear you talk about it, that it's this force that's inside of us and outside of us, that we can feel it and we can, not see it. There's nothing that we could really see from the mind. So how does that tie into, call it the spirit of the human? Does that question make sense?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And it's totally accurate, your question too. So to understand that your spirit, your mind is basically your spirit and your soul. So, and if you go back to all the original translations of those words and everything, you'll see that they actually, it's mind. So spirit and soul end up being mind. If you go right back to to the sort of Greek and ancient Greek and so on. So basically mind is spirit and soul. So it's spirit, soul, body. So I'm talking about the realm of the spirit and the soul, which is which is real. It's the invisible, but we're starting to get a little bit of an understanding of the visibility through things like work in quantum physics and electromagnetics and gravitational field work and that kind of stuff. We're starting to see more of that. And gravitational fields are easy to understand because of gravity, we're not floating. So we know that we've got all these gravitational fields around us. And quantum physics, certain physicists have won Nobel Prizes on a couple of years back where they've developed instrumentation to actually start measuring and looking at the gravitational fields. And then that's all got to do with electromagnetics. It's all complex stuff, but we also see that not only are we in them, but we have our own that's unique. You can't have mine, I can't have yours, which is really nice to know. It's really goes to our uniqueness as humans. And we have control over that. We have agency over that. And there's so much hope in understanding mind. If we eliminate mind, which is what we've done over these past 40 years, because I've been in the field for 38 years, and I've watched, as I started with as a young scientist and practitioner and so on, clinician, I've watched the trajectory as we've learned more about the brain, which has been a fantastic thing. So and medicine and technology, we've actually gone backwards with our understanding of mind. So the more we've become physically neuroreductionistically or neurobiologically dominant, like focusing on what we can see, touch, hear, and feel, we kind of pushed what we can't see as clearly out of the door. And so the science that dominates, it's not the largest part of science, it's not the oldest part of science, it's very modern science, but it's very dominant in our current age, and it influences education and medicine and philosophy, and it is very neuroreductionistic. So you'll hear people talking about the brain produces the mind, or thoughts come from the brain. They can't, because the brain can't do anything without the mind. If you take the mind away, you're dead. That thing, the brain just does nothing. I can take a dead brain out of someone's head and hold it in my hand. We can stare at it all day. It will never do anything. So, we've got to shift our perspective back to the narrative of humans having being all encompassing, spiritual and body, mind and body. So does that answer your question?
No, it does. Absolutely. Yeah. I love it. So knowing that our mind is really what's, the driving force behind everything. It is our unique kind of fingerprint of each one of us individually. How much of our mind is, genetically passed down, given to us from birth? And then what percentage of that do we control, and can we change, through the work that you do and all the strategies that you teach?
Okay, excellent question as well. Also very insightful. First of all, let me start with the easy part. We can control everything in terms of our mind. We can't control events and circumstances and people. But when it comes to our mind, our responses, we control that. We have 100% agency. But it's a skill that we need to develop. So you get better and better. It's a lifestyle. It's not something you can just do once. Like the system I've developed called the neurocycle, which is how you actually learn to train yourself to be a self-regulated mind manager. You do that for the rest of your life, because your mind never stops working. So you wouldn't want to just get it in control once and then carry on and fall back into old patterns again. Because an unmanaged mind basically is creating a vulnerable environment in your brain and your body to disease by a factor of 35 to 98%. Now, who wants to live with their body in a constantly vulnerable state? None of us do. So how do you reverse that? You reverse that by managing your mind. So it's 100% in your agency to be able to control your mind. It's a skill that you learn and develop. So you can change your mind anytime, at all times, and continue for the rest of your life. In terms of what comes through the generations, there's the science of epigenetics, which I talk about as well in my work, in my books, which is things that are epi means over and above the gene. So genes also are not what we call self-generating. They can't switch themselves on. You have to switch a gene on. So what switches genes on and off? And genes are switching on and off all day long, 24/7. Because when they switch on and off, they make cells, they make stuff, they make cells, and they make the things inside cells, and they make what we need to keep alive. So that's happening 24/7. We get slow, medium, and long-term genetic activity happening. But it's all driven by your mind, because the minute you're dead, that doesn't happen anymore. So your mind is driving that as well. So some of the work I've done is looking at DNA and looking at, and I put that in the book too, looking at telomeres, which are the ends of chromosomes. Chromosomes are like little X's in the DNA ladder, and the telomeres would be my fingernails. And telomeres are a very strong indicator of how you're managing your mind and your emotions, your thinking, feeling, and choosing. And the more it's managed, the stronger the telomere. Why is that important? Well, telomeres are involved in cell reproduction, and we are making up to 1 million plus cells every second, which is insane. It's an insane amount, probably more. That's just what scientists estimate. So the quality of the cells that we make is determined by our mind. And why is that important? Well, the cells make the body. So if I have mismanaged mind, poor telomeres, I'm going to have my 37 to 100 trillion cells of the brain and the body are not going to be functioning like they could. And then now my whole body's become vulnerable to disease by 75 to 98%. And that's why I talk about in my book about the federal data that was released between 96 and 2014, showing that despite advances in technology and medicine and neuroscience, people and technology, people are not living longer anymore, which they've done for decades. People are actually dying younger. People and from preventable lifestyle diseases. So people are dying younger from lack of mind management. If you are not managing your mind and your telomeres are shortening, and that's just one aspect. I'm not talking about all those other aspects that happen in your brain and body. If you're living an unmanaged lifestyle, you could have a biological age 30, 40, 50 years older than your actual chronological age, and a sickly version at that. You're vulnerable to everything going around. And if you pair that up with a poor diet and with a poor exercise routine, and a mind that's not driving that properly, I mean, you're just setting yourself up for disaster. And that's what we're seeing. That's what we're seeing in this day and age. And it's a definite new thing for this generation. It's a 40-year-old kind of phenomenon that is not spoken about much yet, but it's called deaths of despair. People are dying from preventable lifestyle diseases. So that's just one aspect of it. So does that answer your question? I mean,
yeah,
we're going
yeah.
down so many routes here. It just so you can control it. Oh, sorry, I didn't fully answer. You asked about the coming through the generations. Okay, so we do the changes that we make, the way we manage our mind builds thoughts into the brain, and I haven't explained that fully yet, but we can come into that after this question if you'd like. But essentially, whatever your parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, great-great-grandparents have experienced, that forms as a physical structure in your brain and also in your DNA. So it passes through the sperm and the ova to the next generations. So all of us are born with our own uniqueness, our own set of DNA, our own mind, brain thing. But we also have inside of this, the DNA, we have the past experiences of going back however many generations, at least 4, probably a lot more than that. But that's over and above what we have as our own unique humanity. So that past does influence who we are, but the good news is it comes through dormant. So it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to happen in your life. It just means the potential exists. So you actually have it's like a tree, literally in your brain, of proteins that comes through. It looks like a tree with roots and branches. And if you've ever seen me teach, I always use these props. But it comes through sealed up. Like imagine this is in a box or something. So it's in your brain and body, but it's sealed. And you can either activate it through can get activated through nurturing the kind of environment that you grow up in, and you can either live into that and make it part of your life, or you can stop that. You can say, I don't want this, and you can actually eliminate this completely. You can completely take this out and reconceptualize it, which is what the neurocycling process that I teach in the second half of the book basically does. So you can get rid of past generational stuff, and you can get rid of your own toxic traumas, because all of us have trauma of different levels of trauma, but we all suffer trauma, and we've all had trauma, and we all need to deal with trauma.
You mentioned, it gets to the point where it begins to kind of show up in our biology, like kind of an unhealthy body. I want to get into how can we begin to recognize these things prior to it manifesting in the physical side.
A great question. So we need to train ourselves in mind management. We need to manage our minds. So the messy mind needs to be managed by the wise mind. And that wise mind is the core of our humanity. It's that deep spiritual wisdom. And an example of our wise mind is someone comes to you and asks you for some advice. and you listen to their story and you give them great advice. And you think, geez, why don't I take that advice myself, kind of thing. We're really good at seeing other people's issues. And, we're not always so good at like seeing our own and giving ourselves, taking our own advice. And that's a skill we need to learn. We need to learn to listen to that inner core wisdom and become listeners. And that also comes from like listening to podcasts like yours and learning all this, because the more knowledge that you build, the more you listen, you're actually wiring that into your brain. So along with the experiences of life, we are also wiring in knowledge all the time. And our wise mind will draw down on the knowledge that is good for you. And that's why continued learning is absolutely essential for optimal functioning. So following podcasts like yours and mine are great, because we're giving information that's very much building in the insurance policy networks in our brain that guide us. With this non-conscious mind being so alert at helping to identify the toxicity in us, it'll send these signals through. So the first point of training yourself to listen to the non-conscious mind is to practice the skill of listening to your signals. And we have 4 categories of signals. And those categories of signals are our emotions. Emotions are not illnesses. Emotions are incredibly important. Uh, Behaviors, what you say and do and how you say and do it. Your bodily sensations, what your body's telling you, and then your perspectives, how you're looking at life. Those are 4 categories, and obviously they can expand into a multitude of different behaviors and emotions and all that kind of thing. So think of for a moment, just come away from the signals and pretend my hands are scales. Those like old fashioned with the balancing thing in the middle, when you put, you're buying something from those old fashioned shops and they put the cheese in one side to weigh the
Oh,
amount
and
of
it
cheese.
bounces it. Yeah.
These scales, and then it kind of bounces and they put weights on the one side. So that's the visual I want you to imagine now. And now all our experiences we have on this side, we've got all our good experiences, and this side, all our bad experiences. And there's a bad, when we're managing our mind via observing our signals and doing all the things that I'm starting to explain, you keeping this balance, because the bad stuff is also telling you stuff. It's not that you want to eliminate the bad stuff. We want to be able to learn from the bad stuff and make it work for us. We want it to become constructive. Because what happens is the bad stuff can get us stuck in guilt and we don't know how to manage it. So we start tipping and the scale starts tipping, and then we can dive deep into negative things. So in this side and in this side, we have emotions, we have behaviors, we have perspectives, and we have bodily sensations. On this side, we would have things like depression and bipolar behaviors, and I'm giving extreme states, life sucks, and extreme pain in one's body or something. Now, that's also still, we mustn't see those as bad. We must see those as information. This side would be like good things, like happiness and body feeling great and life's going whatever. So a great conversation like this where we're learning and that sort of thing. So what we want to do, in life with mind management is look at our signals that we are getting. When we get the good signals, don't just gloss over a great conversation or something that pops your mind that just makes you happy. Like, for example, my granddaughter, I just think of her face and it makes me happy. I won't just let it pass through in 1 second. I'll actually stop and take 5 seconds to visualize and recall what it felt like when I saw her for the first time or something like that. And that wires in a network into my brain that is increasing my resilience and unmasking my resilience. So you want to pay attention to the good stuff when you get signaled, when it pops to your mind. You also want to pay attention to the bad stuff, because the bad stuff has also got information. And if you grab it, you control it, and then you're empowered to change it and to make it work for you. Otherwise, it will drag you down and keep you down there. So instead of saying, "Oh, I'm so bad, I'm doing this," because I know you help a lot of men with pornography addiction and that kind of thing. Any kind of addiction is basically a coping, it's a behavior. So in this particular scale, pornography addiction would be a behavior. And then there's emotions that go with it, which are guilt, desire, all kinds of things. There's bodily sensations, we can guess what those are. And then there's perspective. Why do I always do this? I'm stuck in this. So that's just a very, very broad example. So instead of saying, "Oh my gosh, I'm so bad, I shouldn't do this," which can start tipping the scales and will just actually make you worse and make the addiction worse. What we need to do is say, okay, well, I recognize that it's a mess. It's okay to be a mess. I'm being messy in this. What can I learn from that? Let me identify those emotions. And then what you do is you start a process. So that's the frame. I've set up the frame, sort of the frame. Now you start the process of saying, okay, what are my actual emotions in this moment? Don't think of in general, just think in this moment where I'm feeling a bit stuck. And then, just say my emotions are, I feel whatever. It could be guilt, it could be remorse, it could be desire, whatever. Just label them, no judgment, just very clinical, very organized, very deliberate. Then you would go to, what are my behaviors in this moment? Once again, just create a sentence. What is my perspective in the moment? What are my bodily sensations in the moment? As you do that, you are gathering awareness of these 4 categories of signals of how you are in this particular moment. You've now you've now listened to the non-conscious, because those signals are basically the non-conscious scanning, finding a thought tree and sending up those signals that are attached to that thought tree. So as you pay attention to them, you bring that thought tree into consciousness. That thought tree is that thing that looks like a tree in your brain, and those rolled up things in your body, whatever, everything's activated. And as soon as we know from neuroscience, as soon as you are aware of a thought pattern, not all the details yet, but you've weakened the thought pattern. So you are weakening that network, and that network's what's driving you. So you use the signals to find the network. You then, by doing that, by paying attention, gathering awareness, you then bring it into the conscious mind and you weaken it. Now you are being empowered to take control. So now you go to the next stage, which is now you reflect. Okay, why do I have that emotion? What other emotions do I have? And you ask the why question around the 4 signals. Then you write that down. And when you write down, it's really important not to write like a journal. Don't go writing whole sentences. If you really want to dig deep and get insight and really activate that network, that you can deconstruct it and reconstruct it right down to the roots being the source of where this thing started in the first place, the trunk being how you processed it uniquely, the branches being how it's playing out in your life, and the self-talk and all that stuff. You want to dig deep. So the first 2 stages are helping open the door. It's like literally the door is locked. We can try all kinds of CBT, all kinds of great motivational affirmations, etc. We will not open the door until you go through a very sequential process that aligns with the psychoneurobiological network that needs to be, how it needs to be woken up so that you can rewire. And these steps I'm describing to you are doing that. So the first step, gather awareness, opens the door, brings the thought into consciousness, weakens the networks, the proteins, etc., and the chemicals. Then the second step adds to that weakening, and weakening means you can change it. It becomes malleable. Things that are malleable are changeable because you're now deconstructing. And then you're deconstructing right down to the root, which is the source, and then you can reconstruct. You can't eliminate, but you can deconstruct and reconstruct, which is reconceptualizing. So you always remember what happened to you, what you did, how you were, but you're now changing what it looks like. So you're changing how it drives you and therefore how it plays out into your future. So the third step is adding to this ability to do all of this stuff, and that's the right step. And it's important, as I mentioned, not to write in a journal stage. You can do that later, but not now. Now what you do is just a mind dump. Whatever comes up, you just grab it. So from the gather and reflect, it's stimulated a lot. And you just write as quick as you can all over the page, preferably all over the page, not in lines. If you want to put something like write a sentence, put it in a bubble, try and write the words. And I know it sounds crazy, but the more patterned, the more colorful, the more you're going to go deeper and create a synergy in the network that digs deeper. Then you're going to stop, and 4th step is you're going to look at what you've written to make sense. What's going on here? What are the patterns, the triggers? This is what's happened. What can I do about this? And so on. Then the 5th step is what's the action I'm going to take today? Now, that is a neurocycle. It's 5 steps of the neurocycle. And that is basically the system for how we can change drive neuroplasticity, which is the changes we want to make in our whole psychoneurobiological network, not just the brain, the mind, brain, and body. And so the neurocycle is how you do that. It's the system. And within that, you can put positive affirmations, cognitive behavior techniques, those kinds of things fit at step 5. Those are your actions. But if you don't have the prior steps, those actions become a band aid. But if you put them at step 5, they become a solution. And so there's a huge difference there. So that's basically how you would start managing the process. Key thing here is if we've got an established pattern, and if you've been doing it for more than one day, then and most likely most addictions have been going on for months, if not years. That's going to require time to change. So habits don't form in 21 days. They also aren't changed in 21 days. From the research I've done and others, and we're doing a huge amount of research in this area, and I've just published a paper, we're about to publish another paper, we've got a big study running, another paper going at the end of the year. We have been looking, myself and my team, at how long does it actually take to go from that signal, find the root, deconstruct, reconstruct, all that stuff. And it's around about 9 weeks for one cycle. And in that one cycle, that's like one chunk. And you'd work for using the neurocycle daily for around 5 to 45 minutes. I wouldn't go longer than 45 because it's very, very tiring and your brain will run out of energy like a cell phone, and your conscious mind. And 5 minutes is kind of the minimum because you've got to get through 5 steps. And some days you'll do 5 minutes, some days you'll do 15. It depends on where you are in that cycle. The first 3 weeks are very overwhelming very, you grieve, you feel more anxious, more depressed, your emotions are going to be high because you're starting to see stuff and it's very overwhelming and you're starting to deconstruct. By more or less 3 weeks, you're feeling a level of peace and you have a direction you want to go in. So you've healed the roots and you've started growing the what you would like to be, that new thought you'd like it to be. So there's this new little thought, it's this big, not big, and how you were functioning is kind of half the tree, and how you want to function is the other half. If you stop here, you're going to revert back and get very stuck and get very frustrated. So what you need to do is before you start a new cycle, before you just think you've got it, you need to grow that tree and you need to reduce that side, that's the toxic side, down to just a teeny little branch and make it a nice big green tree. And that requires practicing this each day through the 5 steps for another at least 42 days, another 6 weeks. And I mean, that this is honestly, that's a 2 to 5 minute process. So the second part is very quick, but you've still got to go through the 5 steps. That grows the tree, the strength of the healthy part reduces the toxic part to a very small, tiny little branch, so that you can remember you may be triggered, but you now have the healthy tree that's thoughts, feeding all the memories and thoughts, a new way of thinking. The new network is now going to be the one that drives you. And sometimes if it's a long-standing trauma, because addictions generally grow out of trauma, and trauma is big stuff. It's what's happened to us, the sexual, the verbal, the war trauma, all these bullying, excessive bullying, all those kinds of toxic breakdowns that happen to us, poverty, racism, etc. Those are big, and the more complex, the longer they've been there, the more neurocycles you need to do. So you're not going to get away with one neurocycle one day and think you're better. That doesn't work like that. So it's kind of that. That's kind of the big picture of the whole thing. I've got an app called the Neurocycle app, which I think we spoke about last time. With the neurocycle, the system I've described, the 5 steps, is the neurocycle. It's all scientific. And the app, I literally give you therapy and I walk you through the process. And there's also decompression activities in there, in mini neurocycles. So when things get overwhelming, you can decompress, and mini neurocycles for this to get you through the day. And then there's the book that you interviewed me about last time that has got all this in detail. So that's kind of, if people think, yeah, I need some help, it's a lot. I've said a lot. There are tools out there to help you get through this.
So I have a background in bodybuilding. I mean, I was a competitive bodybuilder for about a decade. And when you get into a sport like that, you see that certain people are, genetically gifted, and they're going to put on muscle a lot easier. They're going to lose fat a whole lot easier. With what you just said there, with it kind of being passed down, but it's dormant. Does this mean that some of us would have to work harder to manage our mind? Like we're more susceptible to maybe the messy mind. So we have to actually do more of the neurocycling work, or be more conscious about controlling, whether it's our thoughts or whatever it is that really controls where our mind goes. Like, is this something where some of us are just, we're going to have to work harder? And if so, like, is there a way for us to know? Because on the bodybuilding side of things, you know when you really start getting into it, like, am I quick responder? Do I put muscle on? And then you have the different body types, endomorph, ectomorph, mesomorph. So is it kind of the same thing with our mind? Like, are some of us just going to have to do more work? And then if so, how could we know if that is us?
Excellent question. And I'm glad you made the distinction, because there's obviously, every person has their own genetic makeup, which is the physical makeup of a person. And quite rightly so. That's got it's got, mind still drives that, but you've got your own unique genotype, phenotype, etc. And that's where, as you say, some people just have the gene. It's just how their makeup works. So that's on a very physical level. In terms of mind, it's so unique for every person. Every person battles. Not every person admits that they battle. But that's the key issue. And some people definitely have learned to manage their mind. And I say learned, and I underscore and I stress learned, because it's a learned thing. Managing our mind is a skill that you learn. That's why we should be teaching our kids from very, very young. It's like you go to the gym. It's the same principle. We don't apply that same principle in our mind. And it's a lifelong journey. You've never made it. You keep going, but you get better and better all the time. So I showed with my research that neurocycling, managing your mind management through the system of the neurocycle, will improve how you're managing your mind by up to 81%, which is phenomenal. Without drugs, medication, you can really, and it can get more. I mean, that's from scientific research. You can get much, but even 10% would change how you function. So I don't think it's as much as, there will be differences. Some people will definitely, it's very much personality wise, where some people may find it easier to get into it. It depends on you as a person. Every person's context is just so different. Maybe someone's had years of war trauma, and they just really have never been able to, or never been allowed to process it. In our current climate, veterans, for example, that come from a war trauma, the management's been shocking. They just get drugged, so they're never allowed to process anything. You can't keep these. Our brains and body are not wired. And what are these? These are thoughts. These are experiences. So if someone, for example, has experienced whatever you've experienced, every experience that you have becomes a physical structure in your brain. Thoughts are real things that occupy mental real estate. And we are building 8,000 to 10,000 thoughts a day in response to the world, to what we're going through in a day. So that's on every day, but then obviously that then goes from a certain point in the womb to where you're at today. You've been building a lot of these thought trees in your brain. So this is a thought, and each thought is an experience. So this is a toxic tree versus this is a healthy tree, a nice green bushy tree. This would be a healthy thought. This would be a toxic thought. This has got a toxic source. So the roots would be the source. So this would be the abuse or the war trauma, whatever it may be, the experience. Then the tree trunk is your perspective that forms out of that traumatic experience. And the branch, so these are the root memories. So this is the thought, the war trauma. That's the name of the thought. That's one thought, one concept, but it's made of lots of memories. So memories are inside thoughts. So thoughts are made of memories. And the root memories are the source of the whatever happened. So that could be the incident, the multiple incidents of war trauma, which then produce the perspective of this is not... We're not designed to kill each other. It totally distorts perspective, and there's so much conflict that is created. So that then this over here, this part, these memories, the branches are the interpretation, your interpretation of this, just in order to cope. So it's kind of like very distorted. It all becomes very distorted because the whole source is distorted. Versus this one is healthy. It's like, for example, our conversation now, the roots part would be my teaching, everything I'm saying, the questions you're asking, that's the source. So lots of memories here, but this is good. This is healthy, a healthy conversation. But these branches over here, everyone's getting the same source memories, but everyone's forming, as they're listening now, are forming their own interpretation of what I'm saying. So how you see this conversation. So your tree looks different to mine, even though you're hearing the same information. So this is healthy, this is toxic. And from day one, we've been experiencing a combination. Now, some of us have had more of this. So if you grew up in a war-torn country, or you grew up where you were constantly physically abused. I just interviewed someone on my podcast the other day who was abused between the ages of 5 and 18. I mean, that's a long time to be sexually abused. So that's a repeated trauma over and over and over again. So and whatever you experience the most, you're going to build bigger trees. So if you imagine that your mind, your non-conscious mind, which is the biggest part of your mind, which operates 24/7, holds all these experiences. And there's a mixture of lots of these, or maybe not as many of these. So someone who's traumatized a lot may have a lot more of these than these. I mean, we've all got a mixture. There's no pattern. There's no one cookie cutter pattern. You, with your unique life story, have a whole mixture of these. And as you go through the rest of your life, you keep making these. You can't not. That's what you do as a human. Your aliveness makes these. And these are taking what you're experiencing and putting these into your brain and your mind and your body, 3 places. So they look like trees in the brain, your experiences. They change the DNA in your body. So they're stored in every cell of your body. So every experience is a tree in your brain with all these memories, plus in the DNA of every cell of your body, plus in the gravitational fields of your mind. So that's why anything that we recall or anything we go through is such a holistic experience. There's all the different elements that are involved in the process. So you can't just push it down and hope it'll go away. It can't, because it's there. It's been established. You have to actually uproot it. Like you would weed a garden. You wouldn't just chop the head of the weed off. You would actually uproot it and you would find the root and you would eliminate it. And that's what you're doing with mind management. Mind management is a process of every single day. You are training yourself to work on 2 levels. The one level is the easier level to understand, is looking at the patterns in your life and recognizing, okay, there's this X pattern, and you deal with a lot with addiction. You help people with addiction, and specifically porn addiction. So there's a pattern. So that pattern is telling you something. So the pattern of whatever the addiction is not a brain disease, which is what we've been told today. That's absolutely not even good. It's not science, okay? It's definitely not accurate, and it's definitely caused a problem. It hasn't helped fix the problem. It's made it worse. What addiction is it's a signal of something that hasn't been dealt with yet, or that is being dealt with, and a multiplicity of stuff. So the only way to manage that is to actually find the source. So you have to become a thought detective. You have to learn how to read the signals, and you have to then basically deconstruct and reconstruct through embracing, processing, and reconceptualizing into the healthy version. And so you take the energy from this. Energy is never lost. It's always transferred. So you take the energy from this and you transfer it into this. You build this, which is how you want to operate. So if you look deeply in here, you'll see, I don't know if you can see it, but some of the leaves are dark green and some are light green. So the dark green is the reconceptualized, how you are going to be without the addiction, because you've now found out the addiction actually was a messenger telling you about this. So as you've gone through the process of the neurocycle, which is how you actually do this mind work, you're going to embrace this and reconceptualize it. So you're going to go through the process of finding the root, pulling it out, and then rebuilding it into this. So the green part is how you now want the past to play out into your future. How do you now want to function now that you know the source of the addiction? How are you going to change that? Because the source is your activator. So how are you going to then manage that? What's your so the dark green leaves are that. The light green is the story, how you got there in the first place. So there's no condemnation in this. It's very freeing and very hopeful, because the way that you show up, addiction and all, is because of a reason. Not that because you're brain disease or you're a bad person. It's because you have suffered in some way, and that was your coping mechanism. And there's a reason for that. So therefore, if you find the reason, you can reconceptualize. But now that takes, for each sort of element, it works in cycles of 3 weeks. So you're not going to do this in one neurocycle, and a neurocycle is 5 steps, and as those 5 steps are 38 years of science. So it's not a quick fix. This is hardcore. When you do this, it's very systematically driving your mind and brain in the direction that is healthy. So in other words, management. The 5 steps are how you manage your mind to change your brain, to change your body, to drive the neuroplasticity. So you aren't going to just do one cycle. That's not enough. If you see a pattern in your life like addiction, and it's happening and in a repeated fashion, that's your warning signal. You need to land your plane in this forest, and you need to say, okay, I'm going to start doing the work. And you're going to do it daily. So the time sequence, what does the time look like to change behavior, to convert this to this, and to turn that into behavior change in your life? It's cycles of 63 days. And this is the research that I've done, not 21. It doesn't take 21 days to change a behavior or form a habit. It takes at least 63. So it's 3 cycles of 21. So you would work daily for around 15 to 45 minutes if you're working on an addiction, and you would do the 5 steps in that time. And the 5 steps incorporates, it's a system. So you can use whatever techniques you're using. If you're using CBT techniques or ACT or whatever you meditate, whatever you're using, you don't stop using that. You just use it properly in the system so that you actually get it, that it's effective. This makes whatever you're doing effective. It makes therapy effective because it's how your mind drives your brain. So you do it every day for 15 to 45 minutes. Within 21 days, you would have embraced, processed, and reconceptualized. You would have found the root. And once you find the root, this thing, energy transfers, and you would have built this. But it's tiny. In that forest of your non-conscious mind, which operates 24/7, where all these trillions upon trillions of experiences that you've had since a certain time in the womb to the age you're at today, is all this trillions and trillions of trees. There's some little ones, there's some big ones, there's different shape ones, different color ones. Each one is representing that unique story of your life. But the ones when you just build something new, it's little. And like you have to water a plant to grow, you've got to do the same thing. So to get these things strong enough that they can actually move from the dynamic, powerful, non-conscious mind into the conscious mind takes this thing's going to have enough energy. It's competing against billions of other thoughts, trillions. So if it doesn't have energy, it's just going to get lost, and you're just going to revert back to this. So you have to make sure this doesn't come back, and that takes another 42 days at minimum to do that. And even in that time, you might find, okay, you've just done the first cycle, just got this part. You need to do another 5. There's no cookie cutter. There's no rule. You may do on one for the addiction. You may spend the whole year or 2 years, but eventually you get to the root of all of it. Each step forward is progress, and there's no condemnation in the time that you take, because everyone's journey, we hear this all the time, it's so cliche, but it's so true that your story is so unique that no one can apply a formula and say that's it. So I'm not giving you a formula, I'm giving you a system, and I'm giving you the way that you can manipulate the system literally to make the changes in your mind and brain integrated to the point where they automatize, which means that they are now energized enough that they can actually now produce behavior change. Where then you're in that situation, you get triggered, the trigger comes from the source, you now know what that is, and you can manage it. So instead of reverting to that addictive behavior, which was a pure coping mechanism, you now can move into the new behavior. And that's kind of what the principle is that's operating.
Last question, Dr. Leaf. We like to end every single show here with the same question. Title here is obviously called The Superhuman Life. For me, living a superhuman life is really a belief system, or it's how I try to show up in the world every day. And it's coming from the place, and I know you and I agree on this, that we're placed here for meaning and purpose. So there's a calling on each and every single one of our lives, but we can't stop there. We must be very intentional about our growth, about our development, and about cleaning up our mental mess so that we can actually bring that purpose into service to others across the world. So Dr. Leaf, as we end today's conversation, how would you define living a superhuman life?
I would define it by realizing that we have the power to change, which is very scientific. So we can't change what's happened to us, but we can change what it looks like inside of us, and therefore how it plays out into our future.
Love that, guys. You're not a victim of your circumstances. You are in power. Pick up the book, connect with Dr. Caroline Leaf. Her podcast is incredible, guys. So we love you guys. If you got value out of this, make sure to share it. Leave us a review. But for Dr. Leaf, Frank Richard, host here. We love you guys. We'll see you next week.